Last year we reviewed the little starter box for Halo Flashpoint, and outside of a few quibbles, we really quite liked it.
So when Mantic contacted us to ask if we'd like to take a look at the new Rise of the Banished expansion box, we were excited to take a look at what it had to offer. Beyond the Banished, obviously.
First, let's get a little housekeeping out the way. This was sent to us by Mantic for review, but no money has exchanged hands, nor do they have any editorial control over what we say about it. These are all our own words. Also, we do just want to say up front that our experience with the Halo video games is fairly light. So how well this adheres to any pre-existing Halo stuff is not our area of expertise. We're more interested in it as a tabletop game in its own right. Based on a well-known IP or not, it should be able to stand on its own. Also, we understand that some of you won't be feeling particularly well disposed towards Microsoft for many reasons, so not going to blame you if you aren't super interested in a box with an Xbox logo on it right now.
Also, won't be talking much about how the base game works since we did that in the first Flashpoint video we did. We'll just talk about what this expansion is adding. But to remind you, Halo Flashpoint is based on Mantic's Dead Zone rules. So it's a grid-based skirmish game where you both roll d8s and compare successes to resolve combat. Flashpoint not only gave Dead Zone a Halo coat of paint, but brought elements from the Halo video games, particularly the PvP, into the gameplay, like regenerating shields, its game types, and the fact that your minis respawn, a little touch that helps keep things interesting. This new expansion, Rise of the Banished, firmly addresses one of the bits of critique many had of the early Flashpoint releases, which was, where are all the non-Spartans? To which the answer was, in the Spartan Edition set, but there is a lot more to Halo than the Spartans, so we get why people wanted to see more than a single team of elites. Interestingly, Mantic haven't gone the obvious route and added pure Covenant forces, what with them being the enemy faction that even non-Halo fans are most likely to be aware of. Instead, they've added the Banished, a group of mercenaries made up of those who have defected from the Covenant and their leader, Atriox. But before we get any further, let's crack open the box and see what's inside.
So there's a fair bit in the box. On top of the new rules, tokens, player cards, and appropriately coloured dice, you have a host of new terrain, a new board to play on, a tasty snack for later, and an empty tray that Mantic made a point to let us know is supposed to be there. There's nothing missing from it. It's so you can store stuff in afterwards. Oh, and of course, the miniatures, which we'll get to in a moment. Stop being impatient. The terrain is, once again, flat pack stuff made of printed card, which goes together nice and easy. Which we like, since it means it doesn't take up much room and doesn't need to be painted. We have more than enough unpainted terrain in our house, thank you very much. Although, as before, make sure to take a little care when assembling it, as it is just card and can be easily damaged. Like the previous terrain, some of it has a slightly different design on one side of it, so you can have it one way or the other. Although the differences here are mostly like, one has the lights on and one has them off, so not quite as interesting as the previous ones, although they make up for that by having more elaborate designs. One thing we were pleased to see is that this has a properly thick foldable board to play on instead of a flimsy card one like in the Recon set. And since the flimsiness of the board from that box we looked at was one of the things we didn't really like from that release, this is very welcome. It'll be our go-to board to play the game on now.
Unlike the box we looked at last time, which was the smaller Recon edition, this one provides a lot more on the mini front, with 2 new teams of Jiralhane, otherwise known as Brutes, and 1 team of Sangheli, otherwise known as Elites and were previously in the Spartan Edition box, and a limited edition version of Atriox, the leader of the Banished. And although to people like us who haven't played many of the Halo games, the fact that this first big expansion into other factions wasn't the iconic Covenant might seem strange, it does make sense since the Covenant proper haven't really existed in the games for quite some time, and Halo Flashpoint seems to be set around whenever Halo Infinite takes place. Turns out that just playing the first 2 Halo games and a prequel hasn't furnished us with up-to-date Halo lore knowledge. Who could have guessed? The new minis are, well, they're pretty big. The Brutes especially towering over the Spartans from the first box we looked at. Although they are still pre-assembled, all 3 teams are distinctly different. Again, unlike the box last time, where the teams were identical. The Sanghelis are obviously their own thing, but the 2 Jiralhane teams consist of the same 4 base bodies, but with variation in the war gear, arms and heads, so the 2 teams aren't the same physically or rules-wise. They're also cast in the same grey plastic colour, which does mean that it's more on you to paint them than the red versus blue plastic setup from last time. Also, I'm happy to say these do not have the issues with the bases being warped that the Spartans did last time. Every mini's base sits nice and firmly on the table. Also, I like the Brute's big goofy elephant feet. They're funny. Being bigger, the details on these have a little more room to breathe, so the finer stuff doesn't look as muddy as it could on the Spartans, which should make them quite nice to paint. Our only real complaint is that one of them was packaged in a way that bent the bayonet, which is a shame, but that's what we have hot water for, I guess. Aside from that though, these feel like a big improvement on what we saw previously.
Now, it is important to remember that this is an expansion. It looks like it could be a standalone release, but it's not, as you don't get the main rulebook or enough dice or counters to play. You will need some version of the base game to add it to, although the main rules are available for free on Mantic's site. You'll also probably want the Wargames expansion, but that's a whole thing, we'll get to that in a moment. But what does this box add to the rules? Well, the new teeny tiny Defiance rulebook adds points values for brutes and their weaponry, allowing you to build teams. It adds the concussive keyword for weapons that pin targets as well as damaging them, and adds new game types. The more standard one is VIP, where 1 mini per side is marked as a VIP and is the target for your opponent, based on the Halo PvP game type of the same name. The second is Attrition, the first of a new game type that's more in line with a not Flashpoint wargame. These big team battles use bigger teams, less equipment drops, and remove respawning. These aren't training matches, these are the real thing where death is permanent. Attrition specifically is based around that once a mini is reduced to 0 HP, they are placed on their side and can either be revived or killed permanently depending on who gets to them first. And while we do think the respawning rules are one of the things that make Flashpoint interesting, having other ways to play is never bad, and Attrition at least does a conventional kill 'em all game type in a slightly novel way. One mildly annoying thing with the new team's rules is that their character cards are formatted differently than the ones from the earlier release. So now speed and armour aren't labelled, and although it's not incomprehensible and you can logic it out quickly, all the stuff explaining the change, as well as giving you updated cards and the new style for your existing minis, was in the previous Wargames expansion. So yeah, I guess we should talk about the Wargames thing now.
Okay, so one thing that is very poorly communicated about this box is that you're probably going to want the pre-existing Wargames expansion to use it all. Preferably the physical edition of it. And you probably wouldn't have known that unless you've been following the game closely and read this particular blog post. At the time of writing, it's not mentioned on Mantic's store page for the expansion and it's not written on the box. So here's what you actually need to know. If you already have one of the starter sets and the physical edition of Wargames, you have everything you need to use everything in the Rise of the Banished box. No worries. If you don't have the Wargames expansion, then you won't have access to the full points system, and a chunk of the new rulebook in this box is adding to that system. If you had the smaller Recon set, you'll also be missing an order card for the Sangheli, and whatever starter set you had, you'll not have the updated character cards Wargames came with, so you'll just have to deal with the fact that the cards are inconsistent. However, the ability to build forces with the points system and the Sangheli order are available for free on Mantic's website through their Halo app. I'm not sure why they call it an app, it's not an application, it's just a bit of their website. Although it should be noted that if you want full access to the rules for each mini or to build more than one list at a time, there is a small monthly fee for the app. Also, if you went for the cheaper digital version of the Wargames expansion and have the Recon set, then you'll still need to use the app to grab the Sangheli order rule, since the digital version doesn't come with any of the cards. And I don't know, this all feels a little messier than it needs to be, especially for something that you can easily miss. I can absolutely see people buying Rise of the Banished and being a little miffed upon realising that they're missing stuff they weren't told about. It doesn't say anything on the store page or the box after all. To be fair, we did raise these concerns with Mantic and they said they're going to review how this kind of information is presented, so hopefully this sort of thing will be more clearly communicated by them in the future. But as it stands, we can't help but feel like they could have at least thrown the Sangheli order card in the box to make this all less messy, and us having to dedicate a chunk of this video to explaining this nonsense. I mean, I wanted to buy the physical Wargames release at some point anyway, because it comes with a whole extra fire team as well as all the other bits and pieces. But now I kind of feel like I have to, which takes away a bit of the fun, doesn't it?
But putting all that nonsense to one side, how do the new Banished fire teams play? Well, after saying all that stuff about needing the Wargames expansion for the points, something Mantic mentioned to us before we even noticed it, it turns out that the generic teams in here, be they Brute or Elite, are actually pretty close in points to the basic Spartan teams from the starter sets. So if you aren't giving anyone upgrades, you can just not worry about the points if you don't want to. Just use the drafting rules of 4 minis in a fire team from the main rulebook. If you want to use Atriox, then just swap 2 other guys out for him. Although, of course, if you are using the full points rules, then you have access to a lot more options, since you can give minis war gear they wouldn't normally start with. In-game, the new Jiralhane are generally slower and have more health than the Spartans, and for the most part have less armour and energy shields to protect them. They're also pretty murderous once they get into close combat, mostly due to their imposing keyword that gives them a +1 die to both attacking and defending, and that many have melee weapons by default, or at least their guns have enough blades on them to count as a melee weapon, but their slow movement means you gotta move smart to utilise their strengths. Still, having things like the Sniper with a shock rifle means that they're not without the ability to absolutely ruin your day at range. And of course, if you do like their weapons, the box comes with the tokens and cards for a bunch of them that can go into your weapon drop rotation.
As mentioned before, the Sangheli aren't actually new for this box, but for the curious, their deal is that they are quick, not particularly bad at anything, have more energy than normal, but have low armour and lower HP than anything else we've got. Also, one of them does come with an energy sword by default, and those things are mildly terrifying in-game. The big lad, Atriox, is as you'd expect, a Jiralhane, but more so, with a massive pool of health, a huge hammer, and so many little buffs from keywords that they are barely able to be contained on his character card. All these new alien buggers do add variety to the game. The Spartans, though specialised for different roles, all kinda have the same vibe once you're actually shooting at them. With the Jiralhane, however, there's a bit more variation from trooper to trooper, meaning that what's good for killing one may not be ideal for killing another. The Sangheli, well, they're less varied since they're all identical apart from their war gear, but at least they're different from the Spartans. And as you can arrange all the minis in this box together into different fire team combinations as they're all part of the same faction, you can really mix and match to find what works for you.
And now onto the sordid topic of coin. The Rise of the Banished box is for sale at Mantic for £100, although you can get the box a little bit cheaper from certain retailers. This means it's the same price as the Spartan Edition starter set, which contains 20 miniatures and everything to play the game, compared to the 13 in this set that isn't standalone. Although it should be remembered that the Brutes are a lot larger and heftier than a Spartan, so you are probably getting a fair bit more raw plastic in this box. Also, there's no one-to-one duplicate minis, and everything does feel a little bit higher quality than last time. Plus, the box is a fair bit cheaper than buying it all individually, and this version of Atriox is unique to it. And if you don't want to go quite all in on the Banished as a faction, the Defiance rules along with the associated tokens and a single fire team of Jiralhane will be up for sale on their own for £40.
So, with all that said, we have enjoyed the Rise of the Banished box. We're very much looking forward to getting some paint on these minis, and it's absolutely added a lot more possibilities to our future Flashpoint games. And the big complaints we had last time about the wobbly bases and cheap feeling playmat from the Recon edition were absolutely remedied here. Hell, the single set of dice you get in here even has 2 more than either of the sets from the Recon edition, so they even remedied our minor complaint about not having quite enough dice in one colour. We just wish they'd done all that whilst communicating what you needed to play with it all a little better. It's not going to be an issue for everybody, but as people who didn't have the Wargames expansion beforehand, that whole thing put a sour edge on what was otherwise a very solid release. But regardless, thank you very much to Mantic for sending the box our way.
And thank you very much for watching.